A whispered secret in the shadows of Hampton Court sealed a young queen's fate. Welcome to the tragic tale of Catherine Howard, where one night sparked a deadly unraveling. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and dive into this gripping story. If you're hooked, hit subscribe. Your support means everything to us. In the glittering yet perilous world of Tudor England, 1540 was a year of ambition, intrigue, and fleeting romance. King Henry VIII, a ruler whose desires reshaped kingdoms, was growing restless with his fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves. Into this volatile court stepped Catherine Howard, a youthful beauty whose charm would both crown her and curse her. At barely 19, Catherine, a member of the influential Howard family, was thrust into the spotlight as a lady-in-waiting. Her story, one of love tangled with danger, begins here, setting the stage for a wedding night that would prove fatal. Catherine's ascent was meteoric. With her lively spirit and striking looks, she caught Henry's eye almost instantly. The king, nearing 50 and battling health issues, saw in Catherine a chance to reclaim his youth. Their courtship was a flurry of extravagance, lavish gifts, courtly dances, and Henry's bold declarations of affection. By July 1540, he annulled his marriage to Anne of Cleves and wed Catherine in a quiet ceremony at Oatlands Palace. To the court, it seemed a fairy tale, a young woman elevated to queen. But beneath the celebrations, Catherine carried a dangerous burden, secrets from her past. As a teenager, she had been involved in romantic entanglements, relationships that, while innocent by modern standards, were scandalous in the eyes of a Tudor king who demanded absolute loyalty and purity. The wedding night loomed as a moment of triumph, but it was fraught with unspoken risks. Catherine, inexperienced in the ruthless politics of the court, didn't fully grasp the scrutiny she faced as queen. Henry's obsession with control meant any hint of impropriety could spell disaster. Her family, the Howards, saw her marriage as a path to power, but they too underestimated the stakes. The wedding night wasn't just a private milestone, it was a public declaration of Catherine's role, one that would be judged mercilessly. Her youth, her charm, and her secrets collided in a way that would soon unravel everything. This chapter only hints at the tragedy to come. The wedding night, meant to cement Catherine's place beside Henry, instead planted the seeds of her downfall. In the next chapter, we'll step into that fateful night and uncover the choices that set her on a collision course with destiny. Stay tuned for more of this dramatic tale. The candles flickered in the grand chambers of Oatlands Palace on July 28, 1540, as Catherine Howard, now Queen of England, prepared for her wedding night with King Henry VIII. The air was thick with expectation, but beneath the surface of celebration, an invisible web of danger was tightening around the young bride. This night, meant to solidify her position as Henry's fifth wife, was instead a turning point where her past and present collided in ways that would haunt her. The court watched closely, and Catherine's every move was under scrutiny, setting the stage for a tragedy that would unfold in the months to come. Catherine, adorned in fine silks and jewels, stepped into her role as queen with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The king, still enchanted by her youth and beauty, saw the night as a renewal of his vigor, a chance to cement their bond. But for Catherine, the intimacy of the wedding night carried a heavier weight. Before her marriage, she had been involved with two men, Henry Manox, her music teacher, and Francis Derham, a secretary in her grandmother's household. These relationships, though not uncommon for a young woman of her time, were dangerous secrets in the context of her new role. Tudor queens were expected to embody purity, and Henry's court was a place where whispers of scandal could turn deadly. Catherine, aware of her past but naive about its consequences, carried these secrets into her marriage bed. The night itself was private, as was customary, but its implications were public. Courtiers and servants, ever eager for gossip, noted every detail of the new queen's demeanour. Catherine's charm and flirtatious nature, which had won Henry's heart, now risked drawing unwanted attention. She was surrounded by members of her Howard family who had pushed for her marriage to secure their influence, but their ambitions blinded them to the risks. The king, too, was unaware of Catherine's history, believing her to be the unblemished bride he desired. Yet, the wedding night marked the moment when Catherine's past began to catch up with her. Her failure to disclose her earlier relationships, even if she saw them as youthful indiscretions, was a misstep that would prove catastrophic in a court where trust was fragile and betrayal was punished harshly. As the night unfolded, Catherine played her part, but the weight of her secrets grew heavier. The court's eyes were on her, and the expectations of queenship were unrelenting. Every smile, every gesture was a performance, and Catherine was unprepared for the role she had taken on. The wedding night, rather than being a moment of triumph, became the first thread in a tapestry of suspicion and intrigue that would unravel her life. The next chapter will explore how these hidden tensions began to surface, drawing Catherine deeper into a dangerous web. The glow of Catherine Howard's wedding night had barely faded when the Tudor court, a nest of ambition and intrigue, began to stir with whispers. By the summer of 1540, Catherine was no longer just a young woman navigating love. She was Queen of England, a role that placed her under relentless scrutiny. The court, with its sharp-eyed nobles and gossip-hungry servants, was a place where secrets rarely stayed buried. The weight of Catherine's past, carried silently into her marriage, was about to collide with the realities of her new position. This chapter delves into the fragile illusion of Catherine's queenship and how the seeds of suspicion, sown on her wedding night, began to sprout in the weeks and months that followed, pulling her closer to ruin. Catherine's early days as queen were marked by a whirlwind of celebration. King Henry VIII, enchanted by his youthful bride, showered her with affection and gifts, lands, jewels, and titles that signaled her elevated status. To the outside world, she was the radiant new queen, a symbol of hope for a king whose previous marriages had ended in disappointment or tragedy. Yet beneath this glittering facade, Catherine was treading dangerous ground. Her past relationships with Henry Manox and Frances Dereham, though left behind in her teenage years, were not as distant as she hoped. These connections, known to some members of her household, lingered like shadows. In Tudor England, a queen's reputation was her shield, and any hint of impropriety could pierce it. Catherine's failure to disclose her history to Henry, whether out of fear or naivety, left her vulnerable in a court where loyalty was both currency and weapon. The Howard family, Catherine's powerful relatives, saw her marriage as a golden opportunity to strengthen their influence over the king. They encouraged her to charm Henry, to solidify their position against rival factions like the Seymours, who had gained power through Henry's third wife, Jane. But the Howards' ambitions blinded them to the risks Catherine faced. Her youth and inexperience made her ill-equipped to navigate the court's political currents. She surrounded herself with familiar faces from her past, including maids and attendants who knew of her earlier indiscretions. These women, some loyal and others opportunistic, became both her comfort and her liability. Among them were those who had served in her grandmother's household at Lambeth, where Catherine's youthful romances had unfolded. Their presence in her royal retinue was a ticking time bomb, as their knowledge of her past could easily slip into the wrong hands in a court fueled by gossip and betrayal. As weeks turned into months, small cracks began to appear in Catherine's carefully curated image. Her lively, flirtatious nature, which had once captivated Henry, now drew curious glances from courtiers. She was young, barely 20, and her playful demeanour stood in stark contrast to the solemnity expected of a queen. At banquets and courtly events she danced and laughed, often catching the eye of younger men in Henry's circle. One such figure was Thomas Culpeper, a dashing gentleman of the king's privy chamber, whose charm and proximity to Catherine would later prove perilous. For now, their interactions were subtle. Shared glances, light conversation, But they did not go unnoticed. Servants whispered and nobles speculated, their words weaving a delicate web of suspicion around the young queen. The court was a place where even innocent gestures could be twisted into scandal, and Catherine, unaware of how closely she was watched, continued to act with the carefree spirit of her youth. Meanwhile, Henry remained oblivious to the gathering storm. His health was declining, plagued by leg ulcers and mood swings, but his affection for Catherine seemed unwavering. He called her his rose without a thorn, a nickname that revealed his idealized view of her purity. This perception, however, was a double-edged sword. Henry's obsession with loyalty, forged by the betrayals of his previous wives, meant he expected absolute devotion. Any hint of Catherine's past, or any suggestion of impropriety, would shatter his trust and unleash his wrath. The young queen, caught between her role as Henry's perfect bride and the reality of her hidden history, was walking a tightrope. Every step she took, every word she spoke, was a potential misstep in a court where enemies waited for an excuse to strike. The tension was compounded by the presence of those who knew Catherine's secrets. Some of her attendants, aware of her earlier relationships, held their tongues out of loyalty or fear. Others, however, saw opportunity in their knowledge. In a court where information was power, a single whisper could change fortunes. As Catherine settled into her role, she remained unaware of how fragile her position was. The wedding night had been a moment of celebration, but it had also marked the beginning of her exposure. The choices she made, keeping her past hidden, surrounding herself with those who knew it, were starting to ripple outward, drawing the attention of those who would use her secrets against her. The court, with its endless rivalries and ambitions, was a stage where Catherine's performance as queen was about to be tested in ways she could not foresee. By the autumn of 1541, the whispers that had begun as faint echoes in the Tudor court had swelled into a storm of accusations against Queen Catherine Howard. The young queen, still navigating the treacherous waters of her role, found herself at the center of a scandal that would shatter her world. What started as idle gossip among servants and courtiers evolved into formal allegations, fueled by political rivalries and personal vendettas. Catherine's past, once a private matter, was dragged into the light, exposing her to the king's unforgiving judgment. This period marked the rapid unraveling of her queenship, as investigations peeled back layers of secrecy, revealing truths that Henry VIII could not ignore. The spark that set off the fire came from an unexpected source. John Lascelles, a Protestant reformer with ties to the court. Lascelles had heard stories from his sister, Mary Hall, who had served in the household of Catherine's grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. Mary recounted tales of Catherine's youthful indiscretions at Lambeth Palace, where, as a teenager, Catherine had engaged in romantic liaisons with her music teacher, Henry Manox, and later with Francis Derham. These relationships involved kisses, embraces, and more intimate encounters that were seen as compromising a future queen's virtue. Lascelles, possibly driven by religious zeal or political ambition, brought this information to Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, a key figure in Henry's court and a supporter of reform. Cranmer, sensing an opportunity to undermine the Catholic-leaning Howard family, presented the allegations to the king during a private meeting at Hampton Court on All Souls' Day, November 2nd, 1541. Henry's initial reaction was one of disbelief and denial. He adored Catherine, seeing her as his perfect, untainted bride. The king ordered a discreet investigation, hoping to prove the accusations false. But as Cranmer and his allies dug deeper, more damning evidence emerged. Witnesses were questioned, including former members of the Dowager Duchess's household. Joan Bulmer, one of Catherine's close confidants and a former roommate, provided testimony about late-night visits and flirtations that had occurred years earlier. Another witness, Alice Restwold, corroborated stories of Catherine's behaviour, painting a picture of a young woman who had not been as innocent as her royal position demanded. The investigation revealed that Derham had even referred to Catherine as his wife in private, suggesting a pre-contract of marriage that could invalidate her union with Henry. As the probe intensified, Catherine's current actions came under scrutiny as well. Rumours of her flirtations with Thomas Culpeper, a handsome courtier and Henry's favourite gentleman of the Privy Chamber, surfaced. Culpeper, related to Catherine through her mother, had been seen in private meetings with the Queen during the royal progress to the north of England in the summer of 1541. These encounters, facilitated by Lady Jane Rochford, the widow of George Boleyn, and a lady-in-waiting to Catherine, took place in secret locations like linen closets and back staircases. Letters exchanged between Catherine and Culpeper were discovered, one of which contained affectionate words that hinted at deeper feelings. "Yours as long as life endures." While some historians debate whether their relationship was consummated, the mere suggestion of adultery was treasonous for a queen. Culpeper, under interrogation and possibly torture, admitted to desiring Catherine but denied full relations, claiming they had only talked and exchanged gifts. The Howard family, once buoyed by Catherine's rise, now faced the fallout. The Duke of Norfolk, Catherine's uncle, distanced himself, denouncing her as an abominable woman to save his own skin. Other relatives, including her brother and step-grandmother, were arrested and questioned. The Dowager Duchess's household was raided, uncovering more evidence of negligence in supervising Catherine's upbringing. Catherine herself was confronted on November 7, 1541, when Cranmer visited her at Hampton Court. Overwhelmed, she initially denied everything, but soon broke down, confessing to her premarital relationships, while insisting she had been faithful to Henry. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. The king, feeling betrayed, ordered her confined to her apartments. By November 11th, she was moved to Sion Abbey, a former convent, where she was stripped of her royal jewels and attended by a reduced household. The court's atmosphere turned poisonous. Henry, devastated and enraged, retreated into seclusion, his health deteriorating further from the shock. Public proclamations denounced Catherine's unchaste life, and on November 22, 1541, she was formally indicted for treason. Her marriage to Henry was declared invalid due to the alleged pre-contract with Derham, and she was attainted by Parliament without trial. Derham and Culpeper were arrested. Derham was charged with presumption of marriage, while Culpeper faced adultery charges. Both men were tried at Guildhall on December 1, 1541, found guilty and sentenced to death. On December 10th, they were executed at Tyburn, Culpeper beheaded, Derham hanged, drawn and quartered. Their heads were displayed on London Bridge as a grim warning. Lady Rochford, implicated as the go-between, was also arrested and interrogated. Under pressure, she suffered a mental breakdown, but provided details that further incriminated Catherine. The young queen, isolated at Sion, spent her days in fear, practicing with a block to prepare for her execution. Her fate was sealed. In January 1542, Parliament passed a Bill of Attainder, making it treason for a queen to conceal her sexual history or commit adultery. Catherine's brief reign, marked by youthful exuberance, had collapsed under the weight of her secrets and the court's merciless politics. The final chapter will reveal the heartbreaking conclusion of Catherine's story as she faces her end with a courage that belied her years. Stay tuned for the poignant close to this tale of tragedy and Tudor intrigue. Winter's chill had settled over England by February 1542, and Catherine Howard, once the radiant queen who had captured Henry VIII's heart, now faced the grim reality of her fate. Isolated at Sion Abbey, stripped of her royal status, she spent her final days under the weight of a treason conviction that left no room for mercy. The accusations that had erupted in the wake of her wedding night, her hidden past and alleged indiscretions, had spiraled into a devastating conclusion. This final chapter unveils the full scope of Catherine's downfall, from her last moments of courage to the execution that ended her life, revealing why that fateful wedding night set her on an irreversible path to tragedy. Catherine's time at Sion was marked by fear and resignation. Confined to a modest household, far from the grandeur of Hampton Court, she was no longer treated as a queen. Her royal jewels had been seized, her attendance reduced, and her every move watched by guards loyal to Henry's counsel. The young woman, barely 21, was haunted by the knowledge that her past relationships with Henry Manox and Francis Derham, combined with her suspected flirtations with Thomas Culpeper, had been twisted into charges of treason. The Bill of Attainder passed by Parliament in January 1542 sealed her doom, declaring it a crime for a queen to conceal her sexual history or engage in adultery. Catherine had no trial, no chance to defend herself publicly. Her fate was decided by a king whose love had turned to rage and a court eager to see her fall. The investigation had left no stone unturned. Catherine's premarital relationships, particularly with Francis Derham, were deemed a betrayal of the king's trust. The suggestion of a pre-contract with Derham invalidated her marriage to Henry in the eyes of the court, branding her not just unchaste, but disloyal. Her meetings with Thomas Culpeper, though possibly innocent of physical betrayal, were interpreted as adulterous intent, a capital offence for a queen. Lady Jane Rochford, who had facilitated these clandestine encounters, faced her own reckoning. Her testimony, given under duress and amidst a mental collapse, painted a damning picture of Catherine's behaviour. Rochford's involvement ensured her own death sentence, tying her fate to the Queen's. The executions of Derham and Culpeper in December 1541 had already sent a chilling message. No one connected to Catherine's scandal would escape punishment. As her final day approached, Catherine showed a resolve that contrasted with her earlier panic. On February 12, 1542, she was informed that her execution would take place the following morning at the Tower of London. Determined to face her end with dignity, she requested a practice block be brought to her room. There, in the quiet of the night, she rehearsed placing her head on the block, preparing herself for the axe's swift descent. This act, both heartbreaking and brave, revealed a young woman trying to reclaim some control over her final moments. Her thoughts, unrecorded but imagined, likely turned to her brief time as queen, barely 18 months, when her youth and charm had promised so much, only to be undone by secrets she had carried into her marriage bed. On the morning of February 13th, 1542, Catherine was led to the scaffold on Tower Green, the same place where her cousin Anne Boleyn had met her end 6 years earlier. Dressed simply, she climbed the steps with a composure that stunned onlookers. In her final speech, she did not protest her innocence as some might have expected. Instead, she acknowledged her punishment as just, expressing regret for her actions and praying for the king's health and the prosperity of England. Her words, though likely rehearsed under pressure, carried a quiet strength. She made no mention of Culpeper or Derham, nor did she dwell on the accusations that had brought her here. Her focus was on acceptance, a final act of submission to a system that had judged her harshly. Lady Rochford followed, her own execution swift and unceremonious, her mind reportedly shattered by the ordeal. The executioner's axe fell, and Catherine's life ended in a single stroke. She was buried in an unmarked grave near Anne Boleyn in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the Tower. Henry, still reeling from the betrayal, did not attend or publicly mourn. The court moved on, and Catherine's name became a cautionary tale, her story overshadowed by the king's next marriage to Catherine Parr. The Howard family, battered by the scandal, retreated from prominence, their ambitions crushed. The wedding night of July 28, 1540, it had been the spark of this tragedy, a moment when Catherine's past, left undisclosed, set her on a collision course with a king's expectations and a court's ruthlessness. Her failure to reveal her history, combined with her naive trust in those around her, allowed enemies to weaponize her secrets, turning love into a death sentence. Catherine's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of power in Tudor England, where a queen's virtue was her only armor and a single misstep could lead to ruin. Her youth, her charm, and her secrets collided on that wedding night, creating a chain of events that no amount of beauty or wit could undo. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Catherine's tragic tale. If you've been gripped by this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more tales of history's forgotten figures.